Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn. And this is episode number 817 of the podcast, and it is Sunday, the 29th of June, 2025, as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking to Jules Horne about writing for audio. We talk about the biggest industry shifts, including the move to subscription models and the impact of AI narration. An honest assessment of the quality of AI voices, according to Jules, who has spent many years in this. What are the tells and how quickly are they improving? As well as practical tips for adapting your nonfiction book for audio, from handling visuals and numbers to structuring for listener retention, how to write with an audio-first mindset, tips for fiction, and more. So that's all coming up in the interview section. In writing, publishing, and AI things. So my editor, Kristen Tate, is on the Words to Write By podcast, talking about how she uses AI tools to help her in her editing business, and also help those clients who embrace AI become better writers and produce better books. Kristen has been my editor for years now, pre-generative AI, and of course I use the tools in different ways, and she has also embraced it. But of course, she says, it is crucial for authors to communicate their preferences and comfort levels regarding the use of AI tools with their editor. Kristen has a clear AI policy and adapts her approach based on individual needs, even turning off certain Microsoft Word features to ensure an absolute firewall if requested. So I think this is really important because I obviously say to Kristen, use everything you can to make my book a better book. And the quality of your prompts, the quality of your own knowledge helps so much. So her use of AI tools with my books really helps me. But she also has this thing where she will not use it at all if clients say so. So I think that's a great idea, having an AI policy as an editor in your contract. So that might be something you want to check with your editor. AI tools can significantly streamline certain editorial tasks, freeing up time to focus on more complex issues. Kristen uses AI as like a power thesaurus to quickly suggest stronger verbs with a prompt like, in this passage, I think the verb could be stronger. Can you give me 5 suggestions for a stronger verb? Also for generating chapter-by-chapter summaries of long manuscripts. Also invaluable for creating style sheets, tracking character details like names and hair colour, and ensuring timeline consistency in complex plots like mysteries and thrillers. For nonfiction, AI can act as an efficient research partner by tracking down original sources for quotes or facts. And on a personal note, I love deep research from Gemini, really over ChatGPT at the moment because it's so good. And Kristen says it's essential for authors to independently check and verify any information provided by AI with reputable sources, as AI can hallucinate as if it doesn't know the answer. But I definitely find that Gemini hallucinates a lot less as it uses so many sources to verify. She says, AI, particularly Claude, is shockingly good at writing book descriptions or back cover copy, a task many authors find challenging. It effectively combines the overall vibe of a book with concrete details, drawing from millions of successful models. AI is also adept at identifying genre tropes that you might not have recognised, which is useful given how much readers love tropes. In terms of weaknesses, AI is not equipped to handle higher-level shifting the frame questions that a human editor can. It won't ask if a passage is necessary, why it's there, or if it's slowing down the story. AI also doesn't get bored or confused like a human reader, which are critical indicators for an editor assessing tension or clarity. There are lots more interesting points in this interview that will help you personally, whether you want to use these tools as part of your editing or also whether you want to work with an editor. And also, I guess, as we said, checking that your editor has an AI policy. So well worth a listen. And I know Kristen cares deeply about language and doing a great job as an editor. So that is the Words to Write By podcast. And then digging deeper into AI this week because the big news is the generative AI fair use ruling in 2 court cases. So the first is the case against Anthropic, which makes Claude, which was sued for violation of copyright for training on copyright works. The BBC and other places report a US judge has ruled that using books to train artificial intelligence software is not a violation of US copyright law. And Anthropic's use of the books was exceedingly transformative and therefore allowed under US law, but rejected Anthropic's request to dismiss the case, ruling the firm would have to stand trial over the use of pirated copies as part of the library of material. So to be clear, they can use copyright works for training on data, but not copyright works in a pirated database, because obviously that was pirated. There was also a ruling in the case against Meta, as reported in Publishers Weekly. Again, the judge found Meta's use was highly transformative under copyright law's fair use doctrine, and the authors failed to present adequate evidence of how they were harmed by Meta's actions. But he also gave some tips on how they might win another time if they can show that models could generate works similar enough in subject matter or genre to compete with the originals. The court noted that generative AI has the potential to flood the market with endless amounts of images, songs, articles, books and more. Yet, apparently, the plaintiffs never so much as mentioned this, nor did they mention it in their summary judgment. So it seems that the case was badly presented, but that is 2 judgments for fair use using copyright data in training. However, as I mentioned, the knowing use of pirated copies is still being litigated, and there will be scope for bringing new cases if a flood of AI books competes with originals. There are still open court cases on this area, and as I've said before, I would expect a flurry of settlements and licensing deals, especially as publishing companies themselves increasingly use AI tools. But if you have been waiting on the sidelines for these cases to be concluded and thinking that perhaps fair use wouldn't be found, well, perhaps with 2 cases in favour of fair use, it is time to jump in. So if you would want to go into more depth on this, have a listen to episode 792 a few months ago with Alicia Wright on fair use and copyright. We talked about this, and this is exactly what we said we expected to happen. And Alicia works across intellectual property law and AI and is also an author, so she is very well placed to talk about that. So yes, that's episode 792 on fair use and copyright. I'll link in the show notes. So in personal news, well, Pilgrimage is out in French. So if you would like a review copy, please email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. It's also coming in German in the next few weeks if you would like to read in German. Now, I did pay for a translation service, so hopefully it's good. Regular listeners will know how much I care about my travel memoir, Pilgrimage. So coming in French and German, not because I expect it to make a ton of money or in fact any money, but I just care about having this information out for people who want to go on pilgrimage and do like the Camino de Santiago and all of that kind of thing. And I met French people and a lot of Germans actually on that walk. So yeah, but translations are always weird since you look at the book, and I've used the same cover as well with obviously the translated title and subtitle, but translations are so weird because even though you wrote the original words in English, you did not write the words in the other language. So it is quite strange and I can't judge the quality myself. So if you would like Pilgrimage in French or German, please do email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. I also have my pre-launch page up for my short story collection. So you might want to go and have a look at the cover of The Buried and the Drowned, which is going to be my first short story collection. And I love this title, and ChatGPT came up with this, which was so cool because I've been writing these particular stories over probably almost a decade now, and I couldn't see the theme of all of them. And yet it came up, well, I got it to do like 30 different titles, but this one is so perfect because so many of the stories are about either digging up things we perhaps shouldn't because I'm obsessed with archaeology, or what was once drowned will be drowned again. And I was once a very regular scuba diver, and so I write a lot about that kind of thing, a lot of underwater stuff and water things in general. So the stories are pretty dark, which you can probably get, and most have an edge of the supernatural, although they are not usually supernatural in themselves. And my model for short stories has always been Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected. And it's so interesting because I think anyone who hasn't read Tales of the Unexpected, or perhaps even read Roald Dahl since they were a kid, those tales are very adult for sure. I think they're sort of the original Black Mirror sorts of stories, very dark, not necessarily about technology, but things with a twist, and should also make you think in some way. And that is my goal with my short stories. So I've just finished Between Two Breaths and am writing The Black Church, set in Iceland. That is where I woke up on my 50th birthday, at the Black Church. And those two stories will be exclusive to the Kickstarter. The others you may have, if you read my short stories, you may have read them before, but this will be the first time they are in print. There will be a gorgeous hardback, and each one of my short stories has an author's note because they're all really personal. And so I will also be including photos from research and experiences that led to those stories. I am human narrating the audiobook, and yes, you can check it out. Sign up at the pre-launch page. It will be in September, but I've put the pre-launch page up now. jfpenn.com/buried. jfpenn.com/buried, and you can see the cover, which I made myself on Midjourney, and then I made the image on Midjourney and then gave it to my cover designer, Jane. And this is what I like. I mean, I obviously talk about the AI-assisted artisan author, and that is what I am. And I'm still human-assisted too. Like I mentioned, Kristen as my editor and Jane as my cover designer both work with me with my use of AI tools. Also, I've been on a few podcasts recently. So the Writing with Purpose podcast with Anna Woolliscroft, talking about writing authentically, personal growth, the role of nature in creativity, and how walking fuels me pretty much every day, how I moved from IT consultant to author and a sustainable author career. I'm also on the Book Funnel podcast, talking about building your authentic author brand over the long term and why you might not have a clue at the beginning. And this is a bit of a theme in a couple of these interviews, because people ask me these questions assuming that I must have just known what I was doing, and I really didn't. And that's okay, because you can pivot over time. And also I have a bit of a rant actually about why we need to get back to writing what we love and what truly calls us to write, especially in an era of generate to market. Yeah, I have a bit of a rant about that. And I also covered similar long-term thinking themes on the Author's Lounge with Osiris. And Osiris asked me questions that, again, assumed I know what I was doing. And I reminded him that he's talking to me now after almost 20 years of writing, and that longevity and consistency count for a lot, especially in an era when people seem to want instant success, and how many of the early years, nobody is listening, nobody is watching, no one is reading. And yet, if you continue, then eventually you can attract an audience. I also talk about how I used to say yes to so much, and now I'm able to say no to most things because I know what is sustainable for me, and I think it takes time to find that confidence, but it is important if you want a long-term career. Also, on my Books and Travel podcast, Wendy Nugent talks about travelling by cruise ship and how that has inspired her cozy mysteries. So that is on my Books and Travel podcast, and photos and notes and things on booksandtravel.page. So thanks for your emails and comments and photos this week. Laurie left a comment on the show notes about going local, says, I'm a Canadian writer and journalist having lots of adventure and success going local in Muskoka, Ontario, a lake district a little like the Hamptons. Oh, very nice. My book is a family story with historic elements. I find cottage owners and lake lovers at local fairs, farmers markets, boat shows, pop-ups and craft shows. Who are keen to hear more about the novel. I love meeting and connecting with them, and it's fun to market the whole experience on Instagram Reels and TikTok. At age 58, going local is the best thing I've ever done. That is great to hear, actually, Laurie. Thanks so much for letting me know. Tom sent a picture. I'm here in Quito, Ecuador, and I happened upon the largest neo-Gothic basilica in the Americas. Thank you, Tom. John sent a picture of a lovely gravestone in a cemetery in Iceland. The name grabbed me and reminded me of you, Jóhann Jóhannesson. I think that was probably a man, but that's fine. And Karen sent a picture on a snowfield wearing ski goggles. I'm listening to the episode How to Pitch a Podcast. I'm in La Pava during school winter break. That looked really cool. And also she says, I listened to episodes in February and March when I was struggling a lot that gave me the strength to continue, The Happy Writer and Intuition, Journaling and Overcoming Fear. So brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. And you can leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel. You can email me, send me pictures of where you're listening or your favourite church or cemetery or Gothic cathedral at joanna@thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. So today's show is sponsored by Draft Digital, who I use for wide ebook publishing and also for managing my co-written book, The Relaxed Author with Mark Leslie Lefebvre, as they do payment splitting, which is super useful. Are you an indie author in need of an easy and efficient print-on-demand service backed by a world-class customer support team? Look no further than D2D Print from Draft Digital. D2D Print is ideal for authors who've already published ebooks but haven't yet experimented with print. With D2D Print, you can convert an ebook to a print-on-demand file with just a few clicks, turn an ebook cover image into a full wraparound print cover in seconds, choose from dozens of beautiful interior layouts, choose from a variety of industry-standard trim sizes and formatting options. You can distribute worldwide, use free ISBNs. You can also order author copies within 32 countries and print proofs without the word proof stamped on the front, like some other companies we know, and also use free change tokens every 90 days to make updates to your published print books. All this and more with no setup or recurring fees. Print on demand is a game changer for indie authors because while brick and mortar bookstores can't physically stock every book, they can check for the print on demand availability when a customer requests it. If you only publish digital books, you could be missing a huge opportunity to reach more readers. Let's fix that with D2D Print. This type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Thanks to the 4 new patrons who've joined in the last week, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to all my backlist videos and audio covering topics on writing craft and author business, as well as tutorials and demos on AI tools. Last week I did my monthly Q&A audio, and also patrons get a discount on my webinars if that's something you're interested in. The Patreon is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of buying me a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous. So if you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join us at patreon.com, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Right, let's get into the interview. Jules Horne is a Scottish playwright, radio dramatist, poet and fiction writer. She also writes non-fiction for authors, including the very useful Writing for Audiobooks. So welcome back to the show, Jules.
Hello, Joanna. Thanks very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you back. It was 2019 when you were last on the show. So first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing and aspects of audio and performance.
Yeah, so audio was never really a big thing in my life, but I did start writing very small and did a bit of, I guess, very junior theatre. And then when I studied literature at uni, I got totally put off all that stuff because it was so daunting. And then I got into playwriting when a theatre company came to our local area and offered workshops, sort of engagement workshops, and that led to some writing commissions eventually. So I ended up writing some stage plays and a few BBC radio dramas, and which was really, really lovely to do, and worked in radio news writing and presenting for a while. So I did quite a bit of recording voice and writing for voice. I did a lot of, and some presenting. So you kind of got a real feel for the flow of audio, and I loved editing different people's voices. That was really fun. So, and the techie side. So I think that led to an interest in audio first, and also a kind of real feel for voices in general and editing. So yeah, it's been a long-term interest of mine.
So yes, as I mentioned, you were on the show in 2019 when we talked about writing for audiobooks, and you've updated the book since then. But I wanted to come back to it because things have really changed, haven't they? I mean, over the last, I guess, let's say 5.5 years. So what are some of the biggest industry shifts in terms of audiobook growth, publishing, subscription platforms, and technology changes? Huge question, but just a sort of overview.
I mean, it's been astonishing. It's just been extraordinary what's happened in the last few years. And I think it was quite slow moving between 2019. We thought it was fast then, but what's happened very recently has just been whoosh. So, I mean, I think the Audible and the ACX being the sort of dominant distribution platform and other smaller ones, they had such a monopoly for so many years. And all that time it's been growing really, really strongly as a publishing niche. It's a really high growth niche in the publishing industry and new markets taking off. And it's still really, really going strong. And I think one of the big things that's changed over that time is far fewer sort of one-off purchases. It's now really fairly strongly gone over to subscription models, similar to when you have, say, Netflix or Prime for TV and films. And that's been for a good few years now. But then Spotify launched its audiobook tier in 2023, which is a bit of a game changer, really, as it puts audiobooks alongside music and podcasts, and it really widens the audience there. And of course that comes along with some worries with Spotify for authors, because it's not been great for musicians, tiny royalties there, so time will tell how that plays out. And then of course AI, which is affecting just every kind of sector. And it has been expected for a while that Amazon would open the gates to AI voices, and now that's happened. You can very simply click and upload your ebook as usual and then add an audiobook with virtual voices. So that's bound to have a major impact on publishing and, of course, on livelihoods for audiobook narrators and actors. So, yeah, that's a huge development in this last while.
Yes, and I mean, obviously, any technological change has a lot of benefits and a lot of downsides. So you mentioned there Spotify and the worries over potential royalties. But from my personal perspective, I often think about these places as, yes, some income, but also marketing and reaching a much wider audience. And in fact, as a listener myself, I moved over to Spotify for podcast listening years ago, maybe 8-9 years ago, and music. And then I moved my audiobook listening over. And so now I wouldn't go back because I listen quite differently and use the Spotify search engine and their algorithm. And so it's like we're meeting listeners where they are. And yes, there are some good things, some bad things, but you can't stop the change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the widening of listenership and different people suddenly able to be introduced to your books in ways they wouldn't have before, I mean, that's huge for authors. So yeah, definitely one to consider.
And again, I mean, we're in a time where a lot of people say, for some reason, I don't read, as if like that's something to be proud of. But a lot of people do listen. A lot of people listen in the car. They listen when they're exercising or whatever they're doing. I listen when I'm out walking. So I think having our books in audio is so important. And yet that it has been very expensive, hasn't it? So again, the trade-off with, yes, there'll be different kinds of work for narrators, but for a lot of authors, it's not human or AI, it's AI or nothing, because they couldn't have afforded it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the thing with what's reading is really interesting too, because I think more and more people are recognising listening as a form of reading. So it's kind of the attitude to that being just listening is changing as well. So people are imbibing books in different ways now, and the cost of AI being really approachable. And I think that if that's the only option, then that's one that authors will definitely be considering, particularly with KDP, where they've made it just such an integral part of the overall indie publishing experience, made it really simple to just upload and continue, and then you can preview some voices and try it out. You can try it out with different voices. It is quite extraordinary, and I think a lot of authors will probably choose that route.
Yes, well, just to timestamp this interview, we're in the middle of June 2025. And in fact, just last week, I got an email from ACX with a survey. I don't know if you got this as well, but it included a whole load of questions around what I might want from AI voices. And it feels like, even though the AVV is through the KDP dashboard and is quite simple, it feels like there might be something else on the horizon. I don't know. Did you get that, or what do you think?
I didn't get that one. What were the questions? That's really curious.
There was things like, here's a list of things that you might be interested in, rate them in order of what you want. And one of them would have been a lot more control of the text and the audio quality, and sales platforms, like how to do much more marketing of things. And it was really interesting because I was like, oh, this seems very, very positive for the future.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one too, because the marketing side with ACX Audible has been really difficult for authors, hasn't it?
Yes.
That you can't really easily, unless you're a vendor on Amazon, you can't really advertise your books, and you can't price it and these kinds of things. So I wonder if that's it'd be great if that was in the offing too.
Yes, and I think that's a kind of basic point for everyone is, even though these things are speeding up, people seem to criticise the voices, for example, and say, oh, well, they're not very good. And it's like, well, they're a lot better than they were 6 months ago. And in 6 months' time, they're going to be even better. But I wanted to ask you about this because you are very experienced in all this different voice stuff, different elements of human voice performance. So I think your ear is probably very attuned. But, let us know really honestly, what do you think about some of the quality of these AI narrated voices, or AI voices in general?
I think the quality is changing super fast, and I think what maybe sounds a bit kind of monotonous, I think that's the main quality that AI voices tend to have now. I think that's going to change really fast, and when you hear some of the higher end products in that space, like 11 Labs, you kind of realise the way things are evolving. It is quite astounding, really. But at the moment, there are very clear tells. And I think most people will be able to pick those up. Although, having said that, like in film imagery, it's starting to get like quite blurred as to whether you can hear or not. I think it's still fairly... I did test my partner on a couple of examples. Is this an AI or is this not an AI? And what's really astounding is sometimes he thought a human voice was an AI, which is kind of, oh, heck, and that's happening with photos too, and with films. And you remember that thing about the food photography where people were saying, actually, the AI food photography looks much more appetizing and realistic. Yeah. And so where's that heading? I think that it's about variation and variety. Sort of technically, it's often things like the emphasis on the wrong syllable. So I hear a lot of downward inflections, and if you listen to the KDP examples, you hear this. Once upon a time there was a do, and then diddle-a-diddle-diddle-a-do. So there's a lot of similarity. Rhythm. Yeah, it's the rhythm, and also the kind of pitch goes down in quite a kind of regular way, and over time that can get quite almost sleepy. So people often have much more, they go up at the end of sentences and they go down, and a lot of the AIs are kind of going down at the end. So I'm hearing that a lot and thinking, that might be somebody's natural inflection, but I think it's quite a pattern when you listen to the voice samples in KDP. So I guess that's something they might look out. And the other thing I notice is, as tells, but you have to listen blooming hard to hear these and really be on the alert for them, is emphasis on the wrong syllable. So one I heard was like salt pans rather than salt pans, or hot to the touch rather than hot to the touch. So it might just slightly misplace the emphasis in a phrase. And that, but I listened to your book. I think your voice clone is absolutely amazing. That's a higher end 11 Labs voice clone.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely uncanny. Your voice timbre and the inflections in your voice are just amazing. All I could hear very occasionally was a slight misemphasis of something like salt pans rather than salt pans. It was that kind of thing. But that was the tell for me. But otherwise, I don't think I'd have known. So, yeah, it's very interesting.
It is interesting. Well, coming back to what your husband thought, like, is that a robot voice? Sometimes I will be, in fact, I did this just the other week. I listened to a sample of someone and I thought, oh, I quite like his voice. And it was the author doing it. And then after a bit, maybe even half an hour, I was like, I can't even listen to this anymore. So I feel like the level of judgment that we have for human narration is also pretty similar. So as you mentioned there, the wrong emphasis, I listened and directed almost every single line of that book, Death Valley. And Simon Patrick, who helped do it, and we worked really hard. And so it's very interesting because it may have been, if I had narrated that myself as a human, that I would have said the same emphasis, and that you would have thought that was different. And when we're proof listening to humans, these things come up, don't they? There's always things that you might disagree with in terms of the way things are said.
Absolutely. And there are natural inflections in certain kinds of accents, which might be indistinguishable from the way that an AI would say it. So it might have a downward pattern, or that thing that in a lot of British English now, people have that going up at the end.
I think that comes from the Americans.
Does it? Okay. So, I mean, that's an inflection that's in some areas. But, I mean, how much would you know? Say, I, as a Scottish speaker, as a speaker of Scots, I wouldn't know whether that accent, which is a South Carolina accent or something, is authentic or not. And I think if you're at a distance from the accent that the book is read in, you probably couldn't tell. I mean, some of the Scottish accents, for example, because I'm really close to it, I'm finding, that doesn't sound very authentic. But a lot of American accents, I really wouldn't know where it was or whether it was authentic or not. And I think conversely that would happen with them in British accents. So it's all about context, really. And often I've heard that if people are primed to hear this, if people are primed that it's AI, then they listen in a different way to not knowing. So I think the blur is just something that's going to get more and more blurry.
Yeah, I agree. And as you say, labelling things, and I label everything so people will know whether or not it's human me or voice clone me. But I get exactly what you say. And I also feel like people have different expectations of what they want from audio. So you mentioned there BBC radio dramas that you've been involved with. Now, the expectation is an incredibly high quality, human, possibly famous actors in that kind of production, and compare that to me out for a walk, listening to a nonfiction book on Spotify, walking near the busy road or something. I mean, I have a completely different expectation of the content and the production than a BBC radio drama. So there's different levels, aren't there?
Yeah, you're listening in different ways and you're listening for different reasons, and there are different genres. You might be listening for information or for entertainment, and these things will change how you listen. And I think a lot of audiobooks narrated by AI are more towards non-fiction, which seems to me a kind of sensible use when people are listening for information. Why does it have to be a very kind of highly performed kind of voice, a highly characterized kind of voice, whereas if you've got a novel with a lively characterization, you want to hear that spoken in a particular way, and really if it leaps off the page, you want it to leap off in the audio experience as well. So I think they're very different contexts.
Well, then also to ask you, like, again, the radio drama, there's the multicast production, maybe with sound effects. And this is something that for indie authors has been almost entirely impossible because of the expense and the technical skill you really need to do to edit like a multicast radio drama. So what are your thoughts on multi-voice with AI? Is that going to make it more accessible to people?
I think, I guess it's open to experiment and to people trying these things out, because these are sort of new possibilities that are coming in, and people may try those things. I really am interested in what that might mean for radio drama, because that definitely means huge implications for actor jobs, which is a massive concern. And you're seeing in film more people using avatars and people using sets differently, sort of artificial sets. So it's really quite seismic throughout the creative industries. I think for indie authors, it is kind of an opportunity to try some things out. I don't know whether many people have yet tried that multi-voice with AI voices, but things like the voice changer are quite transformative. It's really fun to actually try that out, because with that you get the expressiveness and the inflections of your own emotion put across. So the spacing and the kind of intensity are in there, but you can change the timbre and the kind of voice quality. That's really interesting, I think, that combination. And I wonder if indie authors and indeed producers, maybe in the radio drama sphere, might be starting to experiment with that kind of thing. It certainly gives you the option of a massive cast, which you wouldn't be able to do. I guess, in film, you've got CGI, and in some ways people have been able to build crowd scenes that they wouldn't have been able to do. They wouldn't have the budget to do the Cecil B. DeMille thing. And what are the options then in the sound world? It's a really interesting time.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I can see, for example, maybe you keep the big name actors because they're the ones that, the headlines on the Audible Extra. You see the big actor names, but then there might be, 20 other voices in the production, right? That perhaps somebody would have just only narrated a couple of lines of, I don't know, the police person coming to the door or something like that. So I think at the moment, it's sort of this whole book is AI narrated or this whole book is human. But I can see a sort of hybrid approach with the multicast type production.
I can, but actually I think it'd be technically a real pain to edit, and an actor with an actor's versatility and different sort of performance skills. I mean, I think there's a bit of a difference for me between a trained actor with massive performance skills, which are just, it's just brilliant to hear, and someone who's maybe got a beautiful voice but hasn't got the performance background. For a novel, I think I'd be looking for that narrator every time, and I just think actually they'll do a superb job of that, and part of the interest for the listener is also hearing, like your Stephen Fry or actors who have got that kind of really engaging versatility and a lovely voice. I just think that's a more immersive and engaging and compelling experience for me. So I think that I don't think it'll ever quite go there, and I think actors will actually do it more effectively. It's just that it does cost a lot more, but then your editing costs, your production costs, I think would be quite high doing multi-voice with short-fire dialogue, that kind of thing. I think that would be quite epic to achieve.
But again, I think that might be now. But also I would say, I mean, there's already famous people licensing their voices of also dead estates. So you mentioned Stephen Fry, who is still alive as we record this. And as you say, wonderful, wonderful writer, actor, voice, talent, all of that. But is it likely that Stephen Fry will license his voice, or that his heirs and successors will license his voice after he dies? And I often think of David Attenborough here. I mean, you and I,
oh gosh,
we would know David Attenborough, who again is still alive as we record this, but he's a pretty old dude, and his voice is super famous, isn't it? It's certainly, as British people and Scottish people, it's like this voice is iconic. I cannot see how the BBC won't be trying to license Attenborough's voice.
Oh God, that's a terrible thought. I mean, I can't imagine him doing it. I think he'd be horrified if his estate and sort of family did it, because that would be such a betrayal. I don't know.
But he will live on.
Yeah, I don't know how he'll live on in his wonderful program, so I don't know if he has that need, but I guess some people are going there and considering. I did spot one on 11 Labs, which was somebody who had licensed their voice, who does a lot of audio online, and yeah.
11 Labs has Laurence Olivier, Deepak Chopra, I mean Maya Angelou.
Wow, I haven't come across. Oh.
Yeah,
have they really got really famous
voices
in
Burt
there?
Reynolds. I'm just looking now. Richard Feynman. I mean, they've got these iconic voices now. They've got John Wayne.
Oh my goodness, I'm shocked. What would John Wayne make of that?
What would Laurence Olivier make of this? I mean, this is the thing. I think it's very hard, and we have these getting it, I think, because we're the people we are at the time we're living. But you fast forward a decade, and goodness knows this will be either completely normal or or what, I don't know. But it is a very interesting time, right?
Yeah, I've certainly had my mind blown by listening to some of these voices and understanding what's possible. It is really mind blowing.
Right. Well, regardless of whether we work with human narrators or AI narration, where we actually have to direct the AI, we still need to keep in mind principles around writing for audio. It's literally not a case of here's the existing book that is in text and it will just be perfect in audio. So let's start with nonfiction. What are some of the things we need to keep in mind if we are trying to adapt a nonfiction book into audio?
Well, I think for non-fiction, the main thing is there are lots of visual elements that are in non-fiction books, like graphs and layout features and header hierarchies and that kind of thing. So for that, you need to find some kind of workaround, such as maybe one of these PDF uploads, or just cut these elements. So I think you need to look very carefully at what are the visual elements that don't translate well into audio. And numbers are another thing that's a little bit tricky because they're hard to take in. Your brain just doesn't hold, I think it's more than 5 or 7 things at one time. As you know, with phone numbers, it can be quite tricky. So there are certain radio conventions like rounding up and down, and also things in radio like somebody's job before somebody's name, that kind of thing, like the company boss Fred Blogs rather than Fred Blogs the company boss, because we take the kind of context in best first and then go into the detail. So I think context and detail is a useful concept in audio writing generally. And other techniques that are really good are forward flagging. So up next, you'll hear that a lot on radio. So people are a bit better oriented, and then backward flagging. So we've just heard about, say, wombats, and now we're moving on to koala bears. And so that kind of structuring and giving signals so that people are better oriented, I think that's pretty important in nonfiction in particular.
Yeah, you mentioned their lists of numbers. I go further and say lists in general. Sometimes I'll be listening to an audiobook and there's clearly in the text, it will be a list of bullet points, but the way it's read sometimes just doesn't work. So sometimes I think rewriting lists into a more coherent paragraph can work. Yep. And I guess it's the overall point of you're adapting for audio. So sometimes you will actually have to rewrite sections of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've found more productive just over the years is writing audio first. And then I don't have to spend time doing that work of rewriting, because I did find that I needed an awful lot of cuts and then some rejigging, as you say there. And I actually now write audio first, and then I don't have to do that editing. So that was an evolution of my writing process, certainly.
But what do you mean by that? So when you're saying I write audio first, what do you mean?
I read it aloud. I always read it out loud as I'm writing and test it for will it work on air. And so I'm writing it as a kind of performance, and just the sentences are shorter. I won't use really awkward words. I'll make sure the order of information's right, just so that it unfolds well for the listener. There's things like mental backflips, where things like asides, they're a bit trickier with audio, so I'll probably avoid that kind of structure. So yeah, definitely reading it aloud. And to be honest, I think that actually improves your writing anyway, because I think it gives it more clarity. And I just find that really has been helpful for me as an editor. So yeah, that's what I do now as a matter of course.
And I think also, like for me, I often use a lot of references in my nonfiction books at the end of the chapter. And part of my adaptation is really just removing a lot from the narration. So some people are quite religious. They're like, well, no, you have to read every single line that's in the ebook. And I'm like, well, no, you don't actually. It's not even abridged if you don't do things like the resource lists or the appendices and stuff like that. As you mentioned, you can do a download PDF or whatever, but it's almost like removing things like that, or endnotes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly, because they're not going to make very compelling audio. They're just going to sound like that long lists of things, and rels are terrible as well. So that kind of thing, it's great to just put those into a PDF, which most of the platforms I think now have, can have an upload, which adds value as well to what you're providing for the readers. So I think that's a really legitimate way to solve that.
Although, as a listener, I never, ever, ever download the PDF or look at the PDF.
True, but we know it's there, so it's if anyone does want to, yeah.
Yeah, and also on URLs, if there are URLs you do want to say, I use pretty links on my site to make an easy to say, easy to read URL, as opposed to the sort of super, super long one. But generally, I guess it's hard to listen to, and unless someone's taking notes, it doesn't really matter anyway, does it?
Yeah, a good call. And www is so hard to say. So you can just take that bit off and just say yoursitename.com. You don't need to have the www. That's already saving you loads of syllables.
Yes, and actually, well, that's an interesting thing around the human narration versus AI narration. So with human narration, it's so funny because sometimes I will pick up things on a human narration, whether it's me or another professional, and I will have read a different word, even a word that's not there, or I would never have said www out loud because I just assume it wouldn't be read. But of course, AI narration, it is going to read every single thing.
It'll be really literal, absolutely.
So you do have to take it away. I will add there, one of the benefits in inverted commas is if there is a mispronunciation across the whole book, you only have to change it once with AI and it will update the whole thing.
Oh, that's very handy. So character names and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is super useful. Okay, so again, let's come back to fiction then. If we're writing for audio first, what are some tips for fiction?
I think some of these points are general for whether it's fiction or non-fiction. So things like order of information and clarity and not overloading so that there's too much for the listener to take in at once. I remember in the context that people are listening in rather than reading, they're very often doing something else, and they're very often in the car, or there might be noises in the background, or they might be rushing around doing jobs in the house. So it really needs to be very clear, so you can't emphasize that enough. I think some kinds of fiction are more reflective, and maybe you have lots of long sentences and they have that kind of vibe. Long sentences can be hard for a human narrator to read really effectively, so look at the length of sentences. And I did hear some plays being read in my early days, and it was quite horrendous because I realised my sentences, the actors couldn't breathe. They were getting to the end of the sentence, it's kind of, and you realise. So I think that's a really useful tip for fiction. So that reading out loud tip, I think, is really important. And I think also you can maybe cut some of the things like he said, she said. So depending on whether it's a kind of straight narration of a novel or a character performance style of audiobook, there's different sort of genres even within fiction readings. You might be able to cut some of the scaffolding, which is he said, she said, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the most annoying things as a listener is the repetition of words or sounds. And a lot of early writing advice was, just use he said, she said, always use said, because it disappears on the page. And it might disappear to the eyes, but it doesn't disappear to the ear. So as you say, get rid of he said, she said. Use like action tags like Morgan walked to the window and then start speaking. Doesn't have to say use the word said, you can use action. So I think that's really important. But just on your breathing, so another editing tip for audio I found with AI audio is you just add in more punctuation. So it might be incorrect punctuation according to written editorial, but it's punctuation that helps with the direction of the AI audio.
Absolutely. I do that as markup in the script anyway, and you wouldn't put that in the written and printed form, but I used to use a lot of sort of slashes and things and extra commas religiously to make sure the breathing was clear, so I would absolutely do that for an audiobook. And then if you go into the studio, if you're reading your own, it might not be the same as your printed book, but I would have a version where all those things are in there. It saves you a lot of time later on. It saves you fluffing quite a lot. And I think the other thing that's really important for fiction is where you land in sentences. So there's kind of real estate within sentences. It sounds like a bizarre concept, but they're kind of real estate which is more kind of salient, which includes the beginnings and ends of sentences. So sometimes I used to read student fiction, and quite often something like the murder weapon might be buried in the middle of a paragraph and slightly go under. Whereas if you kind of build up to something and then it's the knife, and that's kind of resonant words, it's something from poetry, the use of lines and the use of where things land can be really powerful on air. So it's really worth thinking about that when you're writing, using those powerful places, because they give such clarity to what's going on and make it easier to follow.
Yeah, I actually think that people have to be listeners in order to understand this, as in if you don't listen to audiobooks now and then you're trying to make an audiobook, say, I think you need to be listening in order to understand what sounds good almost.
Yeah, I think that absolutely. I think you have to do your research and listen to books in your genre and get a feel for it and really look closely at the writing. I think I learn a lot from reading writers really closely and working out what they're doing, what tricks are they using, what techniques are they using. And I think that's a really valuable thing for getting into audiobook and audio first writing, to really look closely at what's going on there and see what effects are being used.
Well, I also just wanted to mention that, again, as we record this, it's not out, but the 11 Labs version 3, V3, is going to have this direction available in square brackets. So you can say whispered, and the dialogue will be whispered, as opposed to, you don't have to say she whispered. You can direct the voice within the text. So that is going to be hopefully available, I guess, let's say autumn 2025 maybe. But I mean, that's certainly going to be interesting.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. It reminds me a bit of music, where you have in the annotation for music, you have like the notes, and then you have an extra layer on top, which is, well, here's the expression and what's emphasized and what goes loud and what goes soft. So it's kind of aligned to that. So I think that's a really interesting development.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I've heard about is, again, at the moment we're talking about doing a lot of direction and doing that in the text, but essentially at some point you should just be able to upload a book and it should be able to act that way and do all of that itself. I think there'll be a lot more tools and help with it. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm a bit skeptical about that, because I just think human performance has got lots of expressive possibilities that I don't see AI easily being able to reproduce. So I'm kind of on that fence at the moment, but also knowing how much things are changing, it's really hard to tell. What I noticed in 11 Labs is that you have these sliders. I thought that was really intriguing, that there are different sliders where you can move different parameters. So it's not just a case that you have that voice and that's what you work with. You can also tweak it and have it low, high intensity and kind of change things. So it's interesting what you were saying about working with your producer there and the degree of control that you have within that, which I think people are maybe not aware of. I certainly wasn't, that it's not just a case of uploading it and there it is, but there are lots of tweaks you can do on the way. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, total spectrum, I think, of what you can do in audio. And I think that's what I've always said. I mean, what I would like is the sort of the stratification of audio rights is what I say, where you can license a book for human narration and you can license a book for AI narration and then multicast. And so it's not just one thing. You can have different variations and then different price points as well, because people expect to pay more for a multicast human actor audio than they do for AI narration.
Yeah, I think that's similar to what's happening in books, that sort of special add-ons and special formats that are really sort of artisanal and that kind of thing are command a premium price. So I think similarly with audio, that may happen there as well.
So I just want to pick up there. You said artisanal, whereas I would say artisanal. And this is a classic case of two humans actually pronouncing a word differently. And that also speaks to how difficult it is to direct a human or an AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. The same word pronounced differently by different people in different countries. Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, even though we're technically in different countries, we're still pretty close to each other compared to someone who might live across the other side of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting consideration in audiobooks for lesser known languages or lesser known dialects, because it's an opportunity to maybe hear them more, or voice clones could be used for that kind of thing, and maybe give more airing to lesser known dialects, so maybe more variety in the kinds of audiobooks that people can produce.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was at Frankfurt Book Fair a few years ago, I heard a Ghanaian publisher, and she was basically saying, look, you lot are all discussing this about English language audiobook production. You have this developed market, you have all the structural stuff that you need to have a really strong audiobook culture, and we don't have that. And now we're going to build it. And so this is the point. Again, in English language, we have a long history of doing this. So a lot of people in the industry, but there are countries where there's nothing in their native languages. So I think this is another opportunity, as you say.
Absolutely. I think that's an awesome opportunity. I think that's been the same. It's been the same with books as well. I think access to the means of production is really opening up things for people. And I think that'll just give such great variety for listeners. And I think that's only positive.
Well, I guess before we finish, you're obviously an author and you also produce audiobooks. So how do you recommend authors try and sell more books in audio? What are some of the ways that you market your audiobooks?
Well, at the moment, that's not too easy because I'm with Audible solely, and it's usually on the back of the print and ebooks. So what I would do is advertise that through Amazon and get some audiobook sales on the back of that. Sometimes I've given out QR codes and that kind of thing, but by and large they're just advertising on my site, and I use the marketing via Amazon ads. But I'm hoping that there will be more chance of audiobook direct advertising in future, because that will make a huge difference. And one thing I've never done, which I'm interested, I think you do that, Joanna, that it's possible to sell books on your own website as well.
Yeah.
And some authors are withdrawing from being with Amazon and only selling their audiobook. Some of authors have taken it into their own hands, so there is that possibility as well. And BookFunnel lets you do that. Sort of services like BookFunnel let you have your kind of fans that maybe want to buy your books and buy direct.
Yes, it is actually, I think it is the most profitable way to sell audiobooks, especially in bundles. So, for example, at creativepenbooks.com, you can buy bundles of my audiobooks. And so you get a good deal and I get more profit and I get paid immediately. And so, yeah, I think if you go wide, to me, it's funny now when people say, oh, going wide, to me, going wide means having your own store. Plus all the other things as well. Whereas like you can't do bundling on Audible because, well, you certainly wouldn't want to because of the credit system. So yeah, it is interesting. But of course, if you go non-exclusive with Audible, your royalty drops precipitously.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's definitely a choice, but it certainly can be done. Okay, fantastic. So tell people where authors can find you and your books online.
Where I'm online is at www.method-writing.com, and you can buy my ebook and print books there, and my audiobooks are on Amazon.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much for your time, Jules. That was great.
Thanks for having me, Joanne. It's a pleasure.
So I hope you found the discussion with Jules interesting and a few tips for writing for audio, especially as a different perspective to the interview with Simon last Friday, which was a bit more technical about 11 Labs. So let me know what you think of today's episode. Leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Send me pictures of where you're listening or your favourite cemetery or churchyard. Next Monday, I'm talking to the lovely Ines Johnson about page-turner pacing and multiple streams of income. And Ines is such an enthusiastic writer and businesswoman, so I'm excited to bring that interview to you next week. In the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.